Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 7 of the Beer Enthusiast. We've got a really exciting one here. We've got Lion Stout, classic example of tropical stout, and it's kind of made this kind of ingress into the area. I even saw it at like the local Total Wine, and you can't beat the price. It's like a 4-pack for like $10. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, for an 8.8% ABV big old stout. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I already got mine poured here. Got my stemless tulip so that I can kind of warm this up a little bit. It's been in the fridge at refrigerator temperatures, and this is definitely one you want to let warm up. But there's a little bit to talk about for the recipe, so we'll definitely have some time to do that. This is a 8.8% ABV beer, 55 IBUs. If you're looking at BJCP, you're looking at pale malts, dark roasted malt, crystal malts, hops just for bittering. I looked at a lot of homebrew recipes, and Styrian Golding seemed to just be something that everybody was using, and there were even third party sites that were trying to describe the recipe, and all of them said Styrian Golding. So I don't know if that's just something that everybody's just guessed, or if it's just one of those pieces of lore that starts somewhere and then everyone's like, well, Styrian Golding's got to be it, right? It was in the old beer advocate forums or whatever. So maybe it's just caught on, and Lion Stout's just sitting there and they're just like, okay, we just use, high alpha and that's it, or something like that. Who knows? But you can also use some adjuncts, some sugars to boost gravity, and then traditionally warm fermented lager yeast. But I know when you're kind of getting into these these sorts of styles like Baltic Porter, tropical stout, where there's lager yeast involved, plenty of places will just, they'll just use an ale yeast to kind of turn things around a little more quickly, free up some tank space. So,
yeah, and this is a beer that's been made for quite a long time. It's gone through some recipe changes, I'm sure, because I did read that the ABV has changed, like a lot of really old beers, that can fluctuate. I think it's been as low as 6.3% ABV, and now it's
wow.
all the way up to 8.8. And so, it makes sense that like there are different murmurs about what exactly is in the beer from a bunch of different sources, and we'll see once we get to sensory, whether it kind of comports with our understanding of some of those ingredients we think are in there. But my memory of this beer is it's quite a bit different from some of the other tropical stouts that we can get from time to time. So that's really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and for folks who really want to get, into the weeds on something like the recipe, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine has a great series called Make Your Best, and so they obviously have one for tons of different styles, and it's written usually by usually a professional brewer, and then they scale it down to homebrew level. Usually they share a 5-gallon recipe, and so Josh Weichert, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, has a recipe of Maris Otter, chocolate malts, chocolate rye, touch of roasted barley, and then a nice mix of crystal malts to get all that fruit character, crystal 10, 80, 120, and then some special B as well. So a really, really complex malt build. Actually, he is not a big fan of using sugars for something like this, and really just wants a lot of the fruit character or anything like that to really just come from the malt. I think he's still using German ale yeast, though, at warmer temps, starts out at 65 Fahrenheit or 18 C. And then the part where I would guess is kind of a deviation from tradition is that he suggests just using American, really fruit-forward hops. I think he's a fan of Equinox, but suggests Citra and like a 60-minute and 10-minute edition of Citra.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so fun little, probably deviation, but still a fun thing for homebrewers to try out, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think that there is, when you hear tropical stout, some people think, is it tropical flavored?
Right.
And there are so many interpretations because these are basically just an outgrowth of, well, not basically, like literally English imperialism, British imperialism, and they're branching out in the tropics, taking over all this area and want to have their stout. And so local breweries end up brewing kind of a version of stout after people in the area get a flavor for it. And so that would make sense why, one of the other tropical stouts you can find from time to time is Dragon Stout, which is brewed in Jamaica. And it's like, well, it's going to be different than something that's brewed in Sri Lanka. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely something that sort of came out of the needs of the folks who lived in the area, who were living in the area, and what they they like to drink with, whether it's their weather or their cuisine, all those sorts of things. It's kind of one of the ideas of how kind of this style was born.
Yep.
As well, for sensory, I mean, this pours pretty darn dark. I mean, I am like right up against a light here, and there's barely any sort of even translucence at the edges. Pretty
Yeah,
dark beer
it
here.
is very dark. It's like about the darkest brown you could imagine, before being black, and then just a nice tan, deep tan kind of brown
Mm-hmm.
foam on it.
Yeah, what are you getting on the nose here? I mean, this is just like baker's chocolate, um, just
Yep.
like caramel brittle.
Yeah, it is a lot more sweet impressions as it warms, because at first it was a little bit bready, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
toasty,
I
but
agree.
then I get that milk chocolate, baker's chocolate. There's kind of like a chocolate powder type impression.
Mm,
A little bit of cold brew. It's not like a ginormous coffee nose, but it's sort of like a much smoother um, coffee nose, not like a super dark roasted kind of situation, just like a nice medium roast cold brew kind of deal. Um, Mine does not smell, I think ours is probably from the same batch, and mine does
hmm
not smell particularly fruity. There's a little bit of like a fig, raisin,
Yeah,
something way back there.
I'm getting like a really kind of like darker like raspberry.
Mm,
Yeah, but I agree with you too. There's almost like figs that have a little bit of like kind of like the like a coffee dusted, kind of fig. It seems like there's a little bit of just like a touch of char or cook on them. Really kind
yeah.
of it's stewed fruits, if you will.
Yep, and I can smell the alcohol too. It's got like a spicy and floral alcohol aroma.
Yeah, but pretty smooth on the palate. Not extremely, high perception of bitterness. Uh, it's the alcohol is just like a touch. It's just like it's a little whisper to remind you that it's there. But I mean, yeah, this is for 8.8%. Dare I say, drinkable?
It really is, and it finishes less roasty and less bitter than a lot of stouts in this range, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking Irish extra or foreign extra, that's got a lot more roasted barley character to it. That just like charred bread, almost bitter, kind of roasty element. Um, and then if you're talking like American stouts, this isn't as bitter as those with just
Mm-hmm.
the hopping regimen. This really is kind of sweet finishing. It's not cloying by any means,
Right.
but it's like that's where it becomes a little bit more like Baker's or milk chocolate instead of, like a high percentage dark chocolate bar.
Yeah.
Um, and, I would say it finishes, kind of like medium sweet. It's not like what we think of today as a super, super thick, enormous high finishing gravity.
Yeah.
But it is for what it is, like a very pleasantly sweet finishing beer
Yeah.
to me.
No, I think maybe 10 years ago, this could have easily been something that was quote unquote like high finishing. A brewery that I'm a member at, Brad Clark at Private Press, he talks about this in a podcast on craft beer and brewing, where he was seeing what recipes now are like popular, where like there's finishing gravities that are like 1030, like really really high residual sugar, and
Yeah.
he's talking about he remembers 1015, 1018, and so he kind of finishes kind of in the middle there, because he just can't quite, I think, bring himself to go that high. But I think you're right. I think 10 years ago this would have been kind of the kind of the the higher gravity finishing beer of its day, along with a few others.
Well, the language to describe the beers as the beers modernize and change also changes. And one of my favorite things is this was actually a favorite beer of Michael Jackson, the Beer Hunter.
Oh,
And when I first had this beer, I think when I first had this beer, the can was like a special Michael Jackson edition. So on the back side, it had his like headshot um, holding a beer, presumably Lion Stout. Um, but he has one of his old articles has the most fascinating description of his visit to the brewery. What's the brewery called?
oh gosh, that's not good. Yeah,
Say, is it just Ceylon Company?
we
Yeah, because
should.
Lion Stout is just the beer, and Ceylon Brewing is the brewery. Um,
Yeah,
And
that's something to we gotta remember that.
well, at any rate, it is fascinating. I won't, regurgitate the whole article to you, but two things I wanted to bring up. One was Michael Jackson's tasting notes of this beer. He calls the consistency like, I think he says tar like. He like this to him at that time moment in time was an extremely viscous, thick, molasses. Which that note is actually in here, which we didn't really say, so that's a good callback.
I agree.
So
Yeah.
that's for its time. He I think he said he first had it in 1986, and so for 1986, this is a big boy. You know what I mean? That's like a different thing
Mhm.
altogether. And then the other thing was just like how wildly inefficient it felt getting to the brewery. He said it was. His article says it's a 5-hour drive to one city from the port of Colombo, and then another 4-hour drive up all these steep, windy hills or whatever to get to the brewery. And there he had cask conditioned Lion Stout, which is one of his favorite beers of all time. So there's a lot of old timer beer nerd connection here, and this was a favorite of Michael Jackson, and it's fast becoming a favorite of mine too.
Yeah, I'll see if I can track down that article if it's free somewhere. Maybe get a link in the description of the video. So if I
Yeah,
can do
well,
that, folks, check out the link
yeah, we'll make
below.
sure to we'll make sure to post that in the description, because there are a couple of websites that have aggregated all of his
Mm,
old more public articles, but they're marginally hard to find. So we'll try to give you a direct link to it.
excellent. All right, cool. Let's move on to food pairing. What did you come up with for savory this week?
I was kind of all over the place, but what I think I'm settling on is like a really umami forward, like beef and broccoli. Um, Whether you do the fake, beef for me or regular beef, I think that's going to be a great pairing. You got kind of that like soy, salty, umami sauce that's all over it, a little bit of, cruciferous vegetable. Um, I would do it on, some brown rice instead of white rice, really play up that like toasty, nutty character. And I think that could be super nice. This beer can obviously hold up to, gosh, just about anything. I think what's beautiful about this is a lot of things that you're thinking of for imperial stout, where that beer might overwhelm the dish. This this pulls back the reins just enough to be beautiful with a lot of things that would be tough with that bitterness and roastiness of an imperial stout. So yeah, that was my. I had a couple of different ideas floating around because I still think my world famous chili that I've described a few times. I think this would be really baller with that. Um, but trying to think of something new that I haven't paired with before that would be good. I went, yeah, beef and broccoli, Chinese American style. Beef and broccoli, I think would be good with some brown rice.
Yeah, that's kind of where I went to. I really wanted to do this with charshu, but
Mm,
thought maybe it would be interesting to put do it in some bao buns to kind of play into that like deeply toasted, the kind of pale malt, background note that uh, I think would be great with the bun. Sprinkle some sesame seeds on top of that before you bake it. Toast those,
yeah,
and then like you said, you can just go regular meat, or you can just kind of go with that, sort of charshu kind of glaze, and get some color on it, and do it with tofu or fake meat or whatever you want to do. And then when
right,
I
yeah.
was thinking, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say because the meat obviously is beef is obviously a great pan of what's going on here, but really the synergy that's driving both of our ideas is the sauce.
Mhm.
So as long as you
Yeah.
get just a really scrumptious, unctuous sauce going, that's going to be whatever you're coating that in is it's gonna be a pretty nice pairing.
Hmm. Yeah, and then I tried to go with that in mind. I did try to go with something that was, vegetarian, and I thought just would be just interesting to have with just the kind of Thanksgiving sweet potato topped with marshmallow uh,
Oh, yeah,
dish. I think this would just knock that out of the park. I think because I was
yeah.
thinking that as I was tasting it, I've got my notes and I was like, yeah, if you just threw some marshmallow in here and that kind of really earthy sweetness from sweet potato. I mean, I think you're I think you're hitting it out of the park with that one.
Yeah, and I think a negative interaction that occurs with some of the roastier stouts and marshmallow is it's almost like if I'm having a burnt marshmallow that's too burnt, it
Yeah,
kind of like brings out some ashiness. But this is not roasty enough to do that. I think this is going to be like, oh, the Hershey bar on the s'more. That's gonna be really really nice. I love that idea. Um, and us. I mean, what excuse do we have to bring up like sweet potato and marshmallows or candied yams or
yeah,
holiday
exactly.
type sides? Like we're gonna try to pair that with just about everything. But this, I think, you have a real winner.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I maybe I was just inspired by the island itself.
Mm,
The Ceylon cinnamon trees are indigenous there. And it was like, so coffee cake by itself, just like a cinnamon forward coffee cake, I think would be really great with this. But then, in an age where we have, you know, cronuts and docents and all kinds of, like mashup breakfasty sweets, I would do like a coffee cake style cookie, so you make kind of the batter and everything for a coffee cake, but instead of making it into a crumbly, kind of airy coffee cake, you griddle it as a cookie and get a little bit of like cinnamon roll style icing on it. And that's kind of where my head was at. And I think the cinnamon in particular, not just because cinnamon comes from the same island, but that just like spicy, kind of woody, bright cinnamon character against all that milk chocolatey baker's chocolate character is going to be really nice and reminiscent of a lot of the like modern stouts that people try to make with cinnamon,
absolutely.
but it's kind of like an abraxas,
Oh,
type deal. And the body
hmm.
and the sweetness is big enough to just hold up to a bunch of cinnamon. It's not going to
Yeah,
be like, a teaspoon of cinnamon. It's going to be like having a really good cinnamon hot chocolate, hopefully.
yeah. And you can, and that base cookie, you can do so much after that. Even if you were to bake something like that, and you're like, oh, like maybe the beers, we could still add some more to the cookie, and we can, add some complexity or whatever. You can just throw on some icing or some frosting or whatever. I mean, there's just a lot you can just build from there, and I think
Yeah.
that makes that pairing really interesting.
Well, and one of the suggestions from Michael Jackson is that because coconut is so popular on the island, and
Mm-hmm.
two of their local fermented beverages are like I think they call one toddy, and it's like a lightly fermented coconut sap, but then they do coconut brandy too, and so this with a bunch of coconut stuff or with a sidecar coconut brandy or something like that is going to be really great by itself. But then what if we took those cookies or any cookie and we made an ice cream sandwich out of, coconut ice cream? Let's bring coconut to the party. And I think we're just like, now we're just being greedy. This is going to be so good.
Oh yeah, the pastry stout peeps don't stand a chance. They're hooked.
No, no.
Hook, line, and sinker on that one.
Gotcha.
Yeah. For me, I was kind of just thinking about this time of year, and we're going to be posted. This video is going to go up a few days after Labor Day, and this is like state fair like time.
Mm,
My wife was in Minnesota recently. I don't think she got to go to the state fair while she was there this time around, but that's usually something we would travel for every year. And then the years that we don't travel usually means that at least once a week I'm making some type of deep fried fair food at home. So I've done that a ton, and like the first thing that popped in my mind that just seemed easy was just some deep fried Oreos. I
oh,
was
get
like, that
out of
was
here.
just gonna be, and you could mix it up too. You could go golden Oreos and do something a little different. You could, they've got
Yeah,
lemon ones. I mean, you could just play around with. You could do a deep fried Oreo cookie flight if you really wanted to. I mean,
that's ridiculous. That's
yeah,
so good. Yeah, and fried food is just fried
yeah,
dessert. There, I mean, the moment you said fair food, I was just like, I wish I had thought of that because we, played around in that territory in previous episodes. But yeah,
oh yeah,
fried, deep fried Oreo. Come on,
yeah,
what is even happening?
and
The Orange County Fair is over, so I can't go.
yeah,
I can't go try that. I'm gonna have to deep fry my own Oreos.
yeah. No, and you're right, because I did remember that we had dipped our toes into fair food, and I think the one we had done before was funnel cake, and I think that's so
Mhm.
great because that's going to be a natural addition for something like fruit. So just
Yeah.
just having some strawberries on top, or some sort of berry mix. I think again that's just, and again, if you're not feeling like there's enough matching, you can just play with, you just get a milk chocolate drizzle, then you just start creating more bridges for the pairing, and you're just making it better and better. There's just so much you can do with. There's all sorts of. I mean, you could do your version of you could do coffee cake, funnel cake. I mean, you can,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
the
like you
base
said,
stuff that we're.
what fruit jam is going to be bad with this? Like, I can't
Yeah,
even think with one.
I
You
know.
could have your fried fair food of nearly any variety, and then it's like, oh, do you want a plum jam, or do you want strawberry jam, or do you want grape
Yeah,
jam? This is going
yeah,
to be so good, no matter
yeah.
what. It is kind of begging for fruit because, like what we were saying
Hmm.
before, was there some vague whispers of fruit in the back of the palate? You were kind of getting a little bit of that raspberry thing. I think there was something lightly suggestive of cherry and the fig, plum character, but it's not as big as in like a Belgian quad or
No.
a more English brewed imperial stout that is going to give you some like ball type character. And so, yeah, I think drawing that out with some kind of jam, drizzled over whatever fair food we're getting. There's probably fair food we haven't even thought of yet. That's going to be at next year's Minnesota Fair that is going to be all the rage. But
Yeah. And then I purchased some dessert today specifically to try with this, because I think, cheesecake is always one that everybody wants to bring up with beer, because it seems kind of easy, but it's, I think when you kind of get into the weeds with it, it's not as much of a kind of Swiss Army, pairing. I think people just kind of think like, oh, like every beer has carbonation, and, cheesecake is super, super creamy and dense, and so like there's just going to be, you just need all this cutting power, and it's like, well, you got to go beyond some cutting power, right?
yep,
And I was looking, and I was at I was ordering some cheesecake to get delivered, and they had one, and it was called a have you ever heard of something? I had never heard of this. It was called Basque cheesecake,
yeah, hmm
Basque, where they just kind of like really brown the top. And I was like, oh man, like that's gonna just be like another great like bridge to match. And then I just told them to put a bunch of mixed berries on top. So
yep.
I think I'm gonna thoroughly enjoy that one, and I'll report back for better or worse. So
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I think, like you said, people see the just like cheesecake is so densely creamy, and it's like it's almost hard to just like get it off of your palate in, of course, the most delicious way. Um, but sometimes if a food is so creamy and so dense, just because the beer has carbonation, it almost like evaporates in your mouth and kind of goes away. So you need a beer with a lot of flavor too. Otherwise, it's just going to feel like, oh, okay, I cleaned my palate, but like I could have done that with seltzer water too,
yeah,
you know? So, but yeah,
yeah,
I
exactly.
think that's going to be delicious. I know exactly what you're talking about with Basque style cheesecake. That kind of like almost burnt um, out exterior. Yeah, that's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and I think the good part too is just there's just enough roast to provide some tension. It's not just going to be a bunch of sweet on sweet with any of this stuff. There's just a little bit of something there to kind of brighten things up a little bit, and just kind of make sure everything's not just melting into each other kind of too much. So I
Yeah,
think
the
this
same
is a
idea as like a coffee dusted dessert of any kind, It's just like
absolutely.
just enough. You don't want so much roast that you feel like you're licking ash afterwards after all
Yeah,
the sweetness is done competing. And so this is right in that zone, I think, to give it just that attention. Like you said, almost just like you've dusted coffee over the top of your dessert, but you didn't dunk it in a million dark roasted coffee beans. So.
yeah, yeah. Great beer to try pairing some food with. I hope folks can maybe hopefully track some down. I hope this is getting as much distribution across the country as it is out here. So if you try anything, again, we're always interested. Leave in the comments and stuff, and let us know what's going on for next week, Rodenbach Classic. We're going to be revisiting one that, is a personal favorite of mine, a personal, the style that kind of got me into craft beer. So I'm excited to go over that. And it's a great pairing beer. I'm even just going to bring some ideas for cooking with it because I think it's one of the better cooking beers. So I think we should kind of add a little sub segment to our, pairing, maybe give people some ideas for cooking with it. Yeah, I'm pretty pumped about that one.
Yeah, sounds great. It's amazing we made it this far without doing Rodenbach Classic, so we're
Of course.
excited to get to it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're at the Beer Enthusiasts on Instagram if you want to follow us individually. Chris is the Fresh Beer Enthusiast. I'm Vintage Beer Enthusiast. And cheers, everybody. So good. Thank you for tuning in. And enjoy your tropical stouts while you can.
Cheers, friends.